So kudos to me and Ruth and Tiago. I don't think I posted the video number 1 yet, but I will put all video 1, 2, and 3 in our next email. So you'll have all the videos. So I figured that out last week. It was like a big accomplishment for me, to be honest, because it was really bothering me. The second thing I want to say is June the 6th. So not next week, but the following week, or not the 6th, the 3rd. Hold on, let me just check the calendar really quick. Class 5, June the 2nd, June 2nd. We are going to have our guest speaker come and talk to us, who's Walter Seegers, and I'll put a link into our email as well. He has a show on Contact in one of the window galleries on Church, I believe it's Church and Wellesley, and his work's fantastic. He's so generous, and I love that he comes in. And the reason why I have him come in to speak to you guys is, number one, I've done a lot of work with Walter. We've curated a couple shows. We've curated a show, an international show. We've had a bunch of shows together. We've done a couple shows in Contact, I think 3 together. But that's not the reason why I bring him in. One of the reasons why I bring him in is because his themes of his work are, I think they're like places, things, and people. And I think it's really interesting because not many photographers do that. Not many photographers work within all of those genres. And he does it really well. So I really love the landscapes he's been working on. And he has open, like his body of works aren't, some of them are complete, but some of them are works that he works over a very long period of time. And so and he's so generous. So he talks about his process. He talks about, all of it. But I think it's fun. So he'll come in for half the class and just, talk to us, and we're able to ask him questions. And if you ever have questions outside of class, you're more than welcome to email him. He's a really, really lovely guy, and he's doing really great things. So we did our thesis together and at OCAD, and we did postgraduate residency together. But Walter has continued to I haven't made art in the last year, but Walter still he makes art. Like he gets up every morning and, he's working. I went more the business commercial aspect of it and teaching, and, and I have to be honest, I'm envious of that dedication to waking up and doing it every day. So it'll be a really big treat. So he'll come in on June 2nd and talk to us. Today, we're really going to dive into light, which in composition, and really start. So the last 2 weeks, we really talked about exposure and finding a few things on our cameras. Tonight, we're going to find some more things on our cameras. Larry had a great question in the Facebook group talking about lenses and focal lengths. And Larry, you have a kit lens, right? The 15 to 55?
Yeah, that's what I have. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mainly I've just been staying at 35. So I've just this past week getting out of my comfort zone and going down to 24.
So you keep it mostly at 35. And when you're at 35, it doesn't stop down to lower, than 4.0, right?
No, that's right. Yeah. I thought it was a defect at first, but explain that. No,
it's not. So lens and focal length. So all of us have different lenses on our cameras. Some of us have multiple lenses. But the thing is, and that's the one not the best thing about our kit lenses. So the focal length with our lenses. So it's the distance between the lens and the sensor of our camera. That's what the focal length is. So with 15, it's super wide. And when it's super wide, our apertures are able to open up a little bit larger, but it's a little different. So we're not getting that really compressed feeling like we would get at like an 85 millimeter or one of our like zoom lenses, or 100 or 200 when things are closer up and zoom. At 18 on your camera, Larry, it'll stop down to 3.5. That meaning that's how big that aperture will go. When you're at a 55, it'll only stop down to 55. And that's a default of the lens. I mean, and that's the thing is when people ask me on which cameras to buy, and like Raf was, he's in the process of buying his camera. Did you get it? Yeah. Yay. Is it here or is it ordered?
Yes, I did.
Do you have it like physically yet, or? No. You're just muted. I don't know why.
I lost it.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Do you have it physically with you, or did you?
Yes.
Oh
Yes.
my gosh! Yay!
There she is.
Oh my God, she's beautiful. Are you so excited?
I am. I just put it together today. So I've been reading the manual and just like really going in through everything.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
And it's the Fuji. It's the same one Diego has, right? It's the
It
Fuji.
is. It is exactly the same one, same lens and same everything.
Oh, perfect. So that's so exciting. And so when he was buying his camera, one of the questions he asked me is like, what about this lens? And I had said to him, like, I personally, the lens is what's going to, it's not always the camera, it's the lens that's going to hold you back a little bit, because it's that you're not able to go down to those lower f-stops. So shooting, those larger apertures and letting in more light. But so, I mean, and that's kind of it, Larry. I mean, if you like, to be honest, like one of the things, if you were really to stay in photography, the one thing that I would say to you is to, invest in, like I would invest in a different lens. 50 millimeter lenses tend to be fairly inexpensive, like around $200, and they're able to stop down because you have the Canon, right, Larry? Yeah. So they're able to stop down to you can get a Canon 50, stop down to 1.8. So you get that really blurry background for a little over $200. So I mean,
it's like a drug dealer, right? The first one is so cheap, but then and you start paying, right?
You're so funny. But yeah, kind of. I mean, and it's funny because I remember when I first had my cameras, my first film cameras, and I only shot with 50s. And then, and I remember somebody saying, and it was all manual, right? So even when I would go and shoot, I couldn't shoot things that moved very fast because it was all manual focus. And I remember, upgrading to my first lens, and it was an automatic lens that stopped down to 1.2. And it was oh my God, it was, but like you said, it was really, it changed things for me quite drastically.
Sorry to step in this. You're saying the lens goes down to 1.2 millimeters? Is that what you're saying?
No. So Ali, I'm not sure which camera do you have the Canon camera too, right?
Yeah, my lens goes from 18 to 55.
So you probably have the similar camera as Larry's. And when you stop down your lowest aperture, it goes to 3.5 to 5.6.
Yeah, the lowest aperture I think is 3.5. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're at 15 millimeter, you can stop down. So at the widest your lens will go, meaning that everything 15 is in the frame, more of the images in the frame. Mm-hmm. And then you can go down to a lower aperture number, meaning the opening of the lens is much larger and lets in a lot more light. And it also causes that shallow depth of field. So I would be in focus and the background would be out of focus. Whereas when you're at a 55, which means you're zooming in and you're a bit closer, you can only stop down to 5.6, meaning that the lens is a little bit smaller, the aperture is a little bit smaller, not letting in as much light, and you're not going to get that same really, really blurry background. But here's a few things what depth of field is also controlled by how close you are to an object. So for Larry, one of the things that I had suggested to him, especially when he's doing his baked goods, is turn his camera off of automatic to manual for the lens and focusing it. And often with your lens, unfortunately, because it's not a macro lens, meaning it can't get really, really close, you might have to bring out your lens a little bit further to focus it and then take your picture. But changing it to auto would make a big difference when you're shooting your food. If that doesn't make sense, just stay after the call and we can work through that together, okay?
Yeah, I just want to know about the first week's homework and the second week's homework too.
So just stay after class and I'll get you all caught up, okay? Is that okay? Perfect. So tonight, guys, we're going to dive into some light. Are there any questions about anything that I've gone over already?
Yeah. I just had a quick question. So what kind of lens did you recommend to him?
Oh, so I'll put this in the email too. So a 50 millimeter lens is how your eye sees. It's the focal length of what your eye sees. So there's no distortion. When you're below a 50 millimeter, you start to get distortion in the image. And as you're at 15, not quite 35 and 24, but when you start to go even lower to 15, you'll start to see those horizon lines or those straight lines start to bow slightly. You can correct them in post. But a 50 millimeter, you can get it, and it's fairly inexpensive, like in terms of lenses. It's around $200-ish, depending on if you get a sale or not. And it is able to stop down, meaning that aperture number can go much lower, giving you that shallow depth of field. And you can even get macro ones. So like for someone like Larry who wants to shoot food and is really into, he's at George Brown for other reasons too, that would be, that's one of the things I would suggest for him. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but mine says macro 0.25 to 0.8 feet. What does that mean?
On your lens, that means how close you can get to the object depending on where your focal length of your lens is. Right. There's still some limitations with those kit lenses. That's all.
Okay, all right.
So we've gone over the last 2 weeks, we've gone over exposure. You guys have gotten, you've heard those numbers. You know that exposure is made of light, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And they're kind of like this puzzle that we're trying to piece together. Did anybody find the object on like the last little project that I gave you? There's Kay's. Oh, perfect. Did anybody find that last little project hard, or like to change the ISO from low to high, shutter speed to lowest to high, or, so you're showing motion and stopping motion, and the lowest aperture your camera would go and the highest aperture? How did anybody find that like super difficult? Interesting. You found it difficult, Kay?
Yeah, because I'm working with a kit lens, I don't have a lot of options for aperture. So I actually ended up doing different times of day to get my different shutter speeds so that I could have different lighting effects.
Yeah, but it worked, right?
Oh yes, it was absolutely doable. It just meant taking photos at midnight and at 2 p.m.
Anybody else find?
Yeah, mine didn't look good too much either, pretty much. I just did like the 6 photos of like the lowest and the highest shutter speed and the lowest and the highest ISO, but some of them ended up coming like I did because that's what you wanted, right? But some of them I did like the highest like aperture, but then I didn't really know what to do for the other one. So like I took a picture of like a flower and like literally the whole thing came out like pretty much blurry. So
if the shutter speed is low, it will come out. If it's super low, it will come out blurry because you're going to get some camera shake when you're taking the picture. And that's okay. Like it's a process. One of the reasons or the goals, like just like when I had you guys do that white balance assignment, so you could see that how light changes the color and how your camera sees light. That, that's what your camera can do. And one of the reasons why we did this little exercise is so that you can see what your camera can do, that at low apertures and high apertures, you get different effects. Your camera doesn't see how our eyes do, right? And vice versa. Like, our eyes don't see motion the same way, like, as our camera, like we can show motion, like we can show that blur effect, or we can really stop something. And ISO, you can get that really beautiful pixels and stuff. So it's more about an exercise to kind of show you what your camera can do, the visual, all those visuals. Okay.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Like, so if it's like white or overexposed or underexposed, that was basically what we're trying to see?
Not if it was, so if it was overexposed or underexposed, then,
you wanted to see the highest and the lowest in the same settings though, right?
So equivalent exposure is about getting the same exposure, but changing the way the image looks. So I'm hoping that
each one had to look the same, basically.
Similar. Mm-hmm. Similar.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like to show the contrast, between like what happens if you change it up and down from light to dark, right?
No, here, I'm going to show you. Give me 1 second. Let me show you what some other students did. Hold on. Just to give you an example.
4F4. F4.
Okay. So for example, this student was showing like by, putting soda in a glass, she was showing the motion here with her shutter speed. So, you could see the liquid pouring into the glass. And then this one, you could see the ice like drop and then the splash of the soda come out of it. So she's stopping motion and she's showing motion and stopping motion in those two images. And these two images, she's showing depth of field. So really shallow depth of field. And this one where that background super blurry. And, she had a kit lens. So she just got closer to that glass that she was photographing. Then this one, more of the image is in focus in the background.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I understood something else, like, just you wanted to see the contrast between, highest and lowest, like what happens to the image.
Yeah,
that's what I understood.
So, and then in this particular, it's kind of something similar. She's photographing these balls. So again, showing motion of trying to stop these balls and then stopping motion. These were her ISO images, and she really struggled with getting the ISO, especially when it was at a higher ISO and the same, like she photographed them in a bright day versus that lower ISO. These were her depth of field ones where, the shallow depth of field here. And I think she was photographing against like a frosted glass, but this one was more in focus with that other, with the wider depth of field. These ones I really like. So she was really interested into BB-8. So she photographed, BB-8 on the island. You can see that this is a super wide depth of field. So the cityscape behind is in focus. And this one is shallow depth of field. So a much lower aperture number. So the background is out of focus. These were her motion pictures. So it was a bobblehead. So BB-8 kind of like, showed his motion and it's blurry. And then this one, she didn't know how to it just looks like an object. So she put BB-8 in front of, I thought this was really brilliant actually, in front of a water fountain to stop the motion of BB-8. And then this one, she's showing, I think these were her ISO ones, but you could see the shallow depth of field and the wide depth of field in these. Here's another example, like showing motion. I actually think this is her ISO image. And then this one was stopping motion. You could see the like fly or bee that's about to land on it, as well as showing motion of the pinwheel going on by. And then these ones were, again, shallow depth of field and wide depth of field. And he was showing motion here, stopping motion on this one. I thought that was really funny. The bird next to the bird feeder with the birds coming in. And that was, so did that help, Jenny? Seeing some of those examples?
Yeah, so now I need to correct that.
That's okay. It's a process, right? It's just a process. Like, I mean, and you're not behind because it's just a process. Okay, I'm going to, does anybody else have any questions before I start our lecture really quick?
Yeah, so basically I think I did the same thing Jenny did. Basically, like, I didn't really, know that that's what we were supposed to do. I just thought you wanted us to do like the lowest and the...
Ali, I know this is your second class and that's okay. You just stay after class and there's no late marks in the class. It's just, we're as long as you hand in everything by the end, it's okay. So stay after class and I'll get you caught up. Okay. Perfect. I am going to share my screen. So tonight we're going to learn about light. So we've learned about exposure over the last 2 weeks. We've learned about what makes exposure. And now we're really going to start looking at light and how light can change your images and learning how to see it. I'm sorry, I'm all tangled up here. right before class started, I dropped a whole entire glass of water really close to my computer. It was not the way I wanted to start. So today is all about looking at light. How does light change the way you take an image, and how does light change at different times of the day? And so hopefully this week, because that's going to be what we're going to do, is we're going to start really looking at light. You'll start to see it. So light. What are the different types of light? So we're going to look at front light or directional light. So light that is located right in front of your subject or right in front of you. The sun is a great example of this, of directional light. Sorry, Jenny, what?
Oh, sorry, it was freezing and I wasn't hearing you at all.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anything for the last 30 seconds either. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't hear her now.
Sorry, I'm just muting just to ask my kids to get off the internet. Hold on 1 second.
It sometimes helps too if you turn on the closed captioning option, because then even if we can't hear you, we can read along.
Okay, hopefully that'll work. So directional light, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect. The sun is a good example of directional light. So it comes from one point and is equally emitted in all directions. So this is something that I am always looking at, light, always, no matter what time of day it is, no matter when I'm about to shoot, I'm looking at the direction of the light and the sun, and the direction of the sun is coming. And depending on whether I'm shooting at 9 a.m. or noon or 1 or 2, 3, 4, all the way up to now, like 7 o'clock, the light is constantly changing and the direction of that light is changing, right? It rises in the east and sets in the west. Backlight. So light that strikes your subject from the back. It's just like it sounds. And backlighting can be used to make the subject stand out of the background. So I love backlighting, and it's definitely an acquired taste. And it's, I particularly like it when I'm shooting like evening shoots or first thing in the morning. And if that sun is too harsh and causing really harsh shadows, I put that sun, or I move my models and I have that sun behind them. So often at times that background might be blown out or slightly blown out, but I make sure that my models are exposed correctly. Side lighting is exactly what it sounds like. It's when the light comes from the side and only lights your subject from one side. It can also be referred to broad or short lighting. And split lighting is when you only light half of your subject. So I quite like split lighting. It's a lot easier to do, especially like if you're using natural light when the light is either setting or rising. You have a really hard time doing split lighting at like noon or 1 o'clock in a studio. And it's something that I do with like artificial lights. I don't often do headshots using split lighting because unless it's something moody, it's not very flattering, especially for females. But yeah, it's definitely, but it can be really fun when it's done correctly. So these images were shot within seconds of each other. So backlighting versus direct lighting. And basically what I did is she was standing on this hill and the sun is behind her, and you can see how it starts to highlight her. But the colors are much more muted. They're much more subdued, and there isn't a lot of high contrast. You can also see that, the sky is like a little, it's kind of blown out where that sun is. And all I did is then I walked around her. So I put that sun directly in front of her, on her, and you can see how bright and vibrant and contrasty. And I didn't do any post to these images. This is how, just standing with the light behind her and then the light in front of her, how it can change. And it changes the feeling of the images, or at least it does for me. One is bold and contrast and vibrant, and the other one is it's not, right? It's much more subdued. So backlighting. It's just putting that light behind. And I really love this like rim of light that kind of just highlights the background. You can get some really great highlight. Like right now, the light, at least where I am in Toronto, the light is really beautiful right now. The sun's going to set in about an hour, and this is the golden hour. So the hour before the sun sets, that light is it's dreamy. It can be very tricky to photograph in because it's constantly changing, and the intensity of it changes as well as the color changes. But it's fun to photograph, and you get like a much more softer look. So this light again was just back. And this day, it was a June, super hot day. And here's the thing about light. So I often do not photograph on grass or under trees as a canopy. And can anybody tell me why I wouldn't do that? Anyone?
Shadows?
Shadows? What about the shadows?
They would be uneven, so it kind of speckles over faces.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one reason. Yep. So if the light comes through the trees, you get like a speckled or yes, it can be uneven, but there's another reason too. That's a good answer. Anyone else?
Casting.
Color casting, exactly, Kay. Yes. So as the sun comes down, the grass and the trees act as this reflector, especially the grass. And what happens is that the light hits the grass, it reflects back, and anything that is white is going to be casted green. And I'll be honest with you, you can in post try and take out the green, but it's not easy and it's hard. And often when that happens, I just turn the images black and white and not leave them color. Because I'm too old and been doing this too long to whiten people's teeth and sacral of their eyes. I'm just not doing it. So I don't photograph usually on the grass. In this instance, you can see the sun is behind them and not in front of them. So I'm not going to get that same color cast as if we were shooting at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or even earlier, 12 to 3, where that sun is much more higher above them and it's going to go, hit the grass, bounce back up. Here, it's directly behind them. And you can see, highlights in these lens flares, which I quite like. Here's just some more images. So this is more side lighting. You can see, the height or the shadow on the side of them, but super hot morning. This was amazing person, amazing family, super lovely to photograph, but the light was an absolute nightmare. It was like, I don't know, the end of May last year, super bright, sunny day, hot, and there was not a cloud, and they could only meet at 1 o'clock. And so, you get these really hot, like areas on the image, but there was nothing I could do about it. So, I did the best I could. I kept putting the sun as behind her as possible, but that was it.
That's a nightmare of a photo shoot.
It was, luckily she's amazing. Like I've photographed her a lot and for her business, and yes, it is a nightmare, but when they're only available at a certain time, that's what you got to do. You got to make it work. Front lighting, and that's exactly what it is, directional or front lighting. So that's when that sun is going to be coming right towards you, right? So it's directional. Even though this is slightly off to the side, you get those bright, it's contrasty, it's vibrant, it's bold. Often hurts people's eyes if they have to stare into it too long, especially right now, like at this time of day, like at sunset, if they're looking in that directional light, and you'll get like these golden, and it's not done in post effects. So for example, this little boy that I photographed, this is at sunset. There's no post on it. The light is just that golden, beautiful. But it's bright. So, I mean, he's a little, I could barely get him to stand still, but for an adult who you're posing, the yoga teacher before, she was like, my eyes hurt. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm squinting. Where, this kid he doesn't care. Now, my favorite lighting conditions, and I think all photographers might say the same, is diffuse lighting. And often if I am in a super bright day, and so for example, that one where I was photographing her at 1, usually we were at the beach, and usually like we can go somewhere else on the side of a building, on, you know, a path with some shaded trees, but there isn't a lot of that at the beach. So, you know, I had to get a little bit more creative. But diffuse lighting is like a cloudy day. So I used to have clients call me all the time and be like, can I reschedule? I don't think the sun's going to be shining. And I would be like, oh, your pictures are going to look amazing. You don't want the sun to be shining super bright. You want like those beautiful clouds. Like, so today, this afternoon, you know, it was pretty cloudy outside, and it was just like the most perfect lighting conditions ever. So when you have diffuse lighting, you're going to have much more even light, right? So there's no highlights on her face. There's no, you know, maybe a little shadow here, but the way she's being posed, and even here, but there isn't a lot of shadows. There isn't a lot of bright highlights. It's super even and really, really flattering. And it's also very easy to photograph in. So when you guys are starting off, I strongly suggest looking at shaded areas. And these can be found anywhere. Like often, and I'll show you a couple pictures. Often so I live very close to the Witchwood Barns, and the Witchwood Barns is amazing to photograph at because there's always one side of the barns that is in shade. So during the morning, it's, you know, the far side on Christie, and on the afternoon, it's on the Witchwood side. But like, no matter when you go there, you're always going to find some shade. So, I mean, I love taking clients there just because of that. But I'm always looking for a shaded area, especially on super bright day and when I have to, you know, meet clients closer to noon, just to have that much more diffuse lighting. This was from that photo shoot with the little girl earlier, and I just took her into a laneway. It was a darker laneway, and what I love about when you have diffuse lighting, so you don't have to change. The thing is, when you're doing portraiture, you got to remember all those things, right? You're trying to get the right exposure. You're thinking about what you want the image to look like. But then the most important thing is you're interacting with your clients, right? Or I'm interacting with my clients, and I'm trying to get these expressions and feelings from them. And by doing so, you know, that's a whole nother level. So if I take out that element of trying to constantly having to change my shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, and just have one lighting condition where I've set my ISO, I've looked at my light, I've looked at my background, I've set my ISO, I'm thinking about what I want my image to look like, and then I just have to worry about, you know, getting them to do the things that I want them to do, or asking them, or hanging out, or playing with them. But what I want to show you guys, so what I think will be game changer, especially for some of you, are like looking at light in your house. So front window lighting, and this is front directional lighting. And this lighting I absolutely love. I use this is my studio. I love this lighting, especially when I'm photographing females. It's even. It's blows out any imperfections. Like, I'm older now. I like front lighting. It's not my favorite because I do love a little bit of shading, but you know, if I don't want to see any laugh lines or any of those things, I'm going to put somebody I know. When I'm speaking to my clients, it often comes up, you know, how much can you Photoshop? We're doing direct front lighting. So what you're going to do is you're putting your model or whatever, and this goes with when you're shooting object-based work too. So that's going to be one of our part of our project tonight. But like for someone like Larry who's shooting food, you know, playing around with direct window lighting or side window lighting, or any of my food photographers, you know, this is just when you're doing still lifes and different things. This is just as important when you're doing object-based work as well as if you're doing portrait work. So you're going to put whatever you're photographing in front of the window, and you're going to place your back to the window. Now, the important thing to note is that you don't want to stand directly in front of your model or what you're photographing, because you're going to cast a shadow over that. So I'm moving slightly to the right or the left, and I'm kind of leaning over in order to capture that or whoever I'm taking or whatever I'm taking a picture of. But it's super flattering and it's even and it's really easy to photograph. Now, this is the thing, one of the challenges I want you guys to start looking at is how does light enter your homes? Like, is there a specific area in your house where light comes in, and is it harsh lighting? Is it different throughout the day? Is the light coming in super bright? Like, so for me, our house is north-south, and you know, the sun sets or sun rises in the east and goes to the west. And so we don't have like that super bright east to west light in the morning and afternoon. The front of our house is really dark, and the back of our house tends to be much brighter. But the light in my bedroom is super diffused. And so if I want to do something that's like a light, even light, I'm going to photograph it in my bedroom if I'm photographing in my house. If I want to really start playing around with lights and looking at shadows and contrast, my daughter's room is in the back of the house as well as our bathroom. I'm going to photograph in her room. And I can get some really interesting effects by just moving like the blinds or doing things. So really start paying attention on how light hits and at different times of the day in your house. So that's going to be one of the things we're going to look at this week. So this
Michelle, quick question, Michelle.
Larry.
Why are you shooting with your back to the window? Why not your front to the window and shooting that way?
Well, you tell me. Why, if I put my front to the window and I shot, what would the image look like? So what
you got all the light. Yeah, you got all the light coming in from the front window onto the object.
So, but
right?
if you're photographing an object, so you're doing like a tabletop. So like the object. Yeah, so that's different. So that's a great question. So if you're doing like your food and you got the light coming from the front, or the light would be backlighting it. You're paying attention to the direct. So you're photographing it above, right? Above down.
Yeah.
So that's different than when you're photographing a model.
Okay, I got it.
Do you know what I'm saying? Because I'm looking at what the background's going to look like, but you're doing a flat lay, like you're photographing straight down. So you can photograph it. So, I challenge you this week to look to see, like, does it change whether you have that window in the back of it or on the side of it or in the front of it? It'll change the way it looks. Here are two examples of front lighting. This one was a super, super bright day, and I moved her, further away from my window, even though it's diffused. But you can see it was super bright and contrasty, and this was not. It was like a very overcast day, super, I really had to, I'm shooting this at 1.4, her eyes are in focus, but everything else, like her little hairs and everything, are super soft in those images. Now, this is side window lighting. Now, I love side window lighting for so many reasons. You start to see depth, dimension, three-dimensionality, and all it is this is my son, I'm putting that light on the side of him, and it's coming here. You can see where the catch in his eyes, which is the white area in his eyes. This is the brighter area, and this is the shadow.
Michelle, I'm just wondering, in the diagram, I'm seeing that circle thing. What is that? What's going on there?
What circle thing? This thing over here?
Yeah, is that a mirror, or like what's going on there?
This is a reflector. This is the window, and they're using this, and this is the reflector reflecting back onto it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. So again, this is showing that this is when he's closer to the window, and this is when he's further away from the window. So again, this was a super bright sunny day. You can see by, his clothes on this one are super bright, contrasty. If I moved him further away from the window, it's not having that same contrast, but it's a bit more even, but you still start to see those beautiful shadows. And I like it more when he's further away from the window. So, you see the shadow under his face, underneath his chin. You still get those highlights in everything on the left side of his face, but, you can really start to the light starts to shape him. And that's what I quite love.
Michelle, question. What would be your formula in there, the ISO and the aperture and the shutter speed on the ones on the window?
The window, that's a great question. So first thing I would do is look at the light. If it's super bright, then, I'd probably put it down at 200 or 100. And
Okay.
I shoot with the shallow depth of field. Like I'm an aperture priority portrait photographer. I shoot in lower aperture numbers.
Okay.
So I would, in this particular image, it was super bright in the studio that day. It's not always bright in my studio, depending on the light. More than likely, this was like ISO 200, aperture 2.0, and then whatever the shutter speed needs to be in order to get the right exposure. Does that make sense, Raph?
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So I don't have necessarily a formula all the time. It's more for me, what do I want my picture to look like? Do I want it to be a shallow depth of field, or do I want it to be a wide, like, do I want everything to be in focus, or do I just want one thing to be in focus?
Okay.
And so that's like what I'm always thinking about. So I like when the background is blurry, especially in my portraits, but not all the time, like not for my artwork and different things, but for my portraits, I quite like that. This is that side window light. They lived in this beautiful apartment way up high, like on the 38th floor. And this day was gorgeous. And you can see and I'm just using natural window light, but that window, this is what it's called the catch in the eye. And you can, when you look at portraits and other things, if you really look at their eyes, you can often see what was the lighting source and always what the direction of the light was. And so I'm always doing that. I'm like, what did the softbox look like? Are they using a softbox? Is it a window? What direction? How big is it? I'm always looking at those things. But in this, you can see, the left side of her face tends to be, it's much brighter than this side of her face, even though, in this condition, it's not as drastic as others. And then this is also side lighting. Again, this was a super, super, super bright day. Another example of side lighting, coming in overcast day, brightness on one side of the face, and the other side is, in the shadow a bit. Really starting to create depth and dimension in that portraits. I think it's also important. So this is the back of my house in my daughter's room, and my daughter's the one who came and grabbed me because this beautiful shadow was on the wall, and she came and got me. She's like, Mama, look at this. You should take a picture of it. And then she said, can I be in the picture? And then she sat down and we took this picture. Somebody in my class last night asked me, do I always carry around my camera with me? And the answer is no, I don't. But I often, when I travel with my kids, I do. I just haven't traveled with them lately. And so we used to spend a ton of time at playgrounds, and we still do. But we were at a playground. I was carrying my camera around. My daughter took a break underneath, and she was just sitting underneath it. And this beautiful light just came and just created this texture and dimension under her face, and I had to grab it. So, I made her recreate this picture because I saw it, and then I was like, went to get my camera, and already she had left, and I was like, please come sit down again, which she did. But these images don't have, so often when I used to shoot film a lot and black and white film, I started seeing in black and white because you start to see contrast and highlights and light a lot differently than when you just look at color. And these images don't have that same effect shot in color as they do when they're in black and white. And I started shooting film again a couple years ago in black and white film. And then I went through like a very black and white phase. And it's really funny because my eye did start to see differently. Like when I'm shooting color, I'm much more looking for even light, much more diffused. How can I make those colors pop? But black and white, I'm looking for these bright, like these interesting pops of lights and shadows in different places. And you'll be surprised. You'll see them everywhere now that you're like made aware of it. So what we're going to do, does everybody have access to like a piece of paper or some sort of paper?
Yes.
Something? Perfect. I'm just going to stop. So what we're going to do, if you have a piece, and it doesn't have to be a big piece of paper, 8x10, it's just a piece of paper. It can be written, it can be a receipt, it can be anything. I'm going to put us in breakout rooms. And what we're going to do is I want us to fold the paper in any way that we want. You can fold it, you can crumple it, you can do anything you want to it. Is everyone kind of close to some sort of window-ish kind of. What I want you to do is in a group, so you're going to be in a group of like 3 to 4 people. I want you to bring your piece of paper over to the window because it's going to be different from where everybody is. So just crumple it up. I'm just going to show some of these examples really quick. So we're going to do a light study relating to paper. So how does this light hit this paper and how can we make it like super interesting? And I'll go over that again. So you can fold it any way you want. I want you to bring it as close to the window as possible because the light is kind of, it's super pretty out right now. I wish we were actually all together because it was like so gold and beautiful. And I want you to just shape it and then look to see how it lands. And if you can, share that with your classmates because the light in your house is going to look way different than the light in somebody else's house. Does that make sense? So you're going to bring this paper up. You're going to crumple it up like this. Well, I'm just crumpling mine. And then I'm going to go like
you want
this.
To photograph it or just show it on the webcam?
You can show it on the webcam. You can do, you know what would be really cool, Ali, is if you did a screen save. Does everyone know how to do that? A screen save? Like a screen... a
screenshot or whatever?
Yeah, like so Shift Command, if you're on a Mac, Shift Command 4 or Shift Command 3, you can do that. So like if I wanted to, oh, these are my notes. That was not the best idea. But like I have this piece of paper like this. I'm looking to see how that light hits it. So I'm looking to see where the shadows are, where the highlights are. And if I move it around to see how it looks differently, I don't know if you can see that little, stop sharing. So like for me, if I move it, because I have a light, it looks different. Christopher, can you bring that light closer to me, honey? And then bring it on the side right here. Perfect. So see how like it's highlighted on one side and then super, whoa, and then super like shadowed on the, see this like area right here? So I want you to really, look at this is awful side lighting. Woo! But like, do you see how this is like dark on one side and highlighted on the other? But do you see how the light in it really starts to shape and change the feeling of, and it becomes almost like 3-dimensional, like playing, or look at those crinkles. Does everyone see that? It's kind of cool, right? So I want you to just do this as a classmate and, you know, talk about like, oh, if you photographed it from above, like, or if you photographed it from the side, but really like look at it. So I'm going to put us in breakout rooms and we're only going to spend a few minutes doing this. Perfect. So it's 7:52 now. I'm going to bring us back at 8 o'clock. Okay. All right. Have fun. Perfect. Now I can share. Which is my go-to place for all things like Bristol board and poster board. But I don't know if we can get it there right now. But if you have like a larger piece of paper or something that's very neutral that you can photograph on, it is much easier to start to see the difference. So what we did in my studio is we taped this black background to the wall so that you can see the window is right above it. So like Larry, like what you were saying, it's backlit so that light's coming down. I just used painter's tape so I didn't, you know, and this is what, like, this is a seamless background. This is what I do when I'm shooting portrait work in the studio. It's just on a 9-foot roll versus like a small poster board. And this is for my food photographers or people who want to do object-based work. You know, I use similar setups like this all the time in my studio, but just smaller, like on a much smaller scale. So for me, so this is, we were playing in the studio. And so this is my son and we were trying to stack these objects and the light's coming from here. And so you can start to see this beautiful light highlighting the back of these animals. And you can tell where the direction of the light is by where the shadow is, right? We're looking at the shadow as much as the highlights. So you can see that it's backlight because you've got this very nice diffuse shadow right in front of it. This was shot like he shot these. I was teaching him photography, been teaching him photography over COVID. And this is the table we photographed. So last year I started acquiring lots of objects, like things that were found, whether that's on the street or things that we just found on our walks. And then we started photographing them. I've always really liked balloons, and they were having water balloon flights in the alleyway behind us. And so we started photographing them. Now this light's a little bit different because, can anyone tell me which the direction of the light is? So before it was back because the window
Bottom
was
right.
bottom. So it's coming from the side.
Yeah.
So, and you can tell because the light's hitting over here and that shadow is over here, right? Those shadows. So you really want to start looking at the shadows of where things are hitting your objects. And for this week, it's going to be paper. Somebody asked me, so Ali, you asked like what that one thing in that disc was. So I use reflectors all the time, especially when I'm shooting object-based work and in portraits, but not as much if I don't have somebody helping me. But this is just Bristol board from the dollar store again. And I love it. I use it as a reflector. It's super cheap. It's like $1.25. It doesn't matter if it's banged up or not. And the reason why I use it is that light source is coming from the right-hand side. It's hitting these balloons. And you can kind of see that shadow. It's a bit harsher. I don't love the harsh shadow. I want the shadow to be there. I just want it to be softer. So if I put this board there, and it's white, it's bouncing off that white board and it's reflecting back to the object or whatever I'm photographing. And it's diffusing it slightly so that that light isn't as harsh. Now I'm using a white table, a white background, and I did do a little bit of editing to this, but that's all. We shot it this way. So we really played around with these objects that we were photographing. In this case, these water balloons that had been already used that I washed out and then, played around with photographing them on white surfaces as well as black surfaces, which you'll see later on. And we laid them out, we left them out like this, we stacked them, we did tons of different things with them, which was really fun. So we're going to look at some of these paper. And I want you guys to tell me where you think the light is coming from. Where is the direction of the light coming from when we're looking at these objects?
From the left.
So this one, yeah, they're both coming from the left. Great job. Yep, both. So this one is slightly more diffused and closer to the object. So when your lighting source is closer to what you're photographing and how intense your lighting source is, it's going to be brighter and there might be contrastier. When it's moved further away, and depending on how bright that light source is, so if you're using natural window light or natural light, it could have a much more diffused look or much more softer look to it. But look at this, like these shadows. They're just gorgeous, right? It looks like a drawing, not a photograph.
Is this all natural light?
So some of them are natural light and some of them are artificial light. And so you can, and what I'd love you guys to do, and I'll talk about this. So our exercise this week is going to be taking a piece of paper and photographing it and photographing it in like 4 to 6 different lighting situations. So can you use direct light? Can you use side light? Can you use top light? Can you use backlight? And you'll see it, so can you, and the thing is when you're using window light, which is just one source, you're going to be moving around and you personally are going to get up and move around and move things. But when you're using some sort of artificial light, and my favorite, which I don't have with me, is an IKEA book lamp. And it's one of those ones that have the clamp, and it's on my son's desk right now for school, but I clamp it and then I can move it around. And when you're using artificial light, you're moving the light around what you're photographing. So when you have one source, if you're using natural light, you're moving it, you personally are moving around it. But if you have a light, you're moving the light around the object. So where do you think the direction of the light is coming from in this one?
Frontal view.
Frontal. Ali, does everyone agree with that?
No, it's coming from on the crane, it's coming from the left side because you can see that there's much more shadow in the right-hand side.
Yeah, so there's a little shadow right here and it's so soft. I mean, and you can tell on this one, that image, you know, that light isn't really intense. It's the soft, really diffused. They're shooting this at a super shallow depth of field because, you know, that back crane wing isn't in focus. And it's just like, for me, it looks like a pencil drawing. It's so pretty. And how about this one? Where's that light source? Which direction is it coming from?
Backlit.
Backlit? Everyone agree?
No. I would say frontal again.
Frontal? Anyone else?
Is it coming from the top? Like,
Top?
yeah.
So it's like top back. Like it's definitely backlit. And the reason why you can tell is look at where the shadow is. And would you say the light is more intense and closer to what the object is being photographed versus, you know, softer and diffused, right? It's pretty intense. Like, look at that shadow. The shadow is just as like amazing as these areas. Like, look at these creases and the highlights and the shadows, right? So, I mean, a totally different effect than this one versus this one, right? Just by changing the direction of the light. So these are the same paper and she photographed them in different ways. So this one, where do you think the light's coming from in this one?
Front side.
From which side?
From the left?
The left. Yeah, the left. Yeah, look at that shadow. I mean, that's like, it's bright, right? It's really harsh, contrasty. And then how about this one?
That's frontal.
That's from the back. Are those shadows below it?
So she photographed on plexiglass. And so it is, I think it's coming more from a 45-degree angle in front because you see the shadow right here. And because she's photographing on plexiglass, we get this reflection on the bottom. But it's the same piece of paper. So this is what I'm talking about. Like she's photographing the same piece of paper and just doing it in different like effects or different ways. And it totally changes the feeling of the image. Now, this student made this pyramid. And where do you think the light is coming from or how she's lighting it in this one?
The top.
The top. Yeah, Ruth. Right. There's not a lot of shadow. And then how about this one?
Inside?
The lights at the back.
Yeah, she's illuminating it. It's from inside the object. How about this one?
Backlit.
Backlit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can see it's like glowing back there, right? It's like highlighted all around here and then casting this beautiful shadow right in front of it. And then how about this one?
Frontal?
Yeah, absolutely, Ali. Yep, you can see, look at that triangle right behind there.
I was going to get that one eventually.
You did it.
I just stuck to it.
So that's what our assignment is going to look like this week. Our exercise is going to be taking a piece of paper, choosing a very neutral background and photographing it in either artificial light or window light, and really playing around and looking for those shadows, really trying to make this three-dimensional object or this object look three-dimensional and change the feeling of it, right? Change the feeling of the image just through with lighting. So next, guys, we're going to break out our cameras and we're going to look at the histograms on our cameras. So now this is going to be, again, different. Our histograms are going to be in different places on every camera. If you have a Canon camera, you're going to either go to the display button, and most of your cameras display button, or the info button. So you're going to hit an image. You're going to hit the playback button. You have to have had some picture, like you've had to take a picture. And you're going to either go back to the display or the info button. So playback first, display or info, and it should look like something like this. So I'm going to just stop sharing so people can see. See, like where it has all this information? Has anybody found it on their cameras?
Rory, when you figure it out for the Nikon users, let me know.
Rory,
Yeah, not yet.
Are you Googling it, Rory? Are you Googling it? Are you...
No
About
pressure.
to. About to.
I love it. So playback button on most cameras, and in some cameras, you're going to have to go to the menu depending on where it is. Larry, did you find it? Yeah. Raph, did you find it?
No.
What are we supposed to go
It's a
to?
display button, Ralph.
It's the display button.
So, yeah, is this the display?
Yeah, that's it. That's
And then
it.
it shows the little, yeah.
Yep, Jenny, that's it. Jenny, which camera do you have?
A Nikon Coolpix P900, and it's just the display, it says, and you press it like 2 times, then it'll show.
2 times, guys. Did you have the display button?
Where is display? I'm not seeing the display.
Or info. For me, it's info button. Oops. Playback. So you have to do a playback, like, so you have to have an image on your camera. Did my camera just die? Nope. So I have to go to playback and then info, and then it'll show up.
Is this what I'm looking for?
Oh, just move it down. Yes, exactly. Yep.
That's it?
Ruth, that's
Okay.
it. That's your histogram.
All right.
Did you find it, Raph?
No.
That's okay. Diego, where did you said it was the display button or the?
So you just press the first you need to pick any picture to make sure that you're displaying a particular picture, and then at the very bottom of your camera, on the right hand side of your screen, you're gonna see a display back button. So you just press that button once or twice, and then you will see the histogram.
Who hasn't found it on their cameras? Rory and Ross, have you found it? And
Is
you,
it
I think,
like just the RGB and it's like red and green and blue?
yeah, that's it, Ali. Yep,
But it's like coming up of like my own selected pictures. I don't know.
that's right. That's right.
Okay.
That's what you want.
So for the Canon users, what I did is I just went to like my pictures and then
Okay.
I just went to my pictures and then I started playing there like on the display or whatever.
On the display, that's right. So you need to go to the playback button. So I believe Ross, Federica, and Rory all have similar cameras, the Nikon like 51 or 53. 100. So look at you all are Googling. I love it. Look at it's intense. It's intense. Who's gonna find it first?
I think I just found it.
Oh, Rory, go.
I definitely found it last. but-
Yes, he found it. He found it. So how did
She
you
found it.
Oh, sorry. I apologize.
So it's
I'm sorry.
It's if you just go to playback and press down on the photo, I think that should do it. And I had to actually, I went back into the menu into display mode and then hit RGB histogram on. If
I'm
that
not
doesn't work.
finding that. Is this supposed to look like this?
Yep.
Right.
Okay, then I found it.
So
It's looking
Rory,
different on other people's camera. I don't know.
So
Yeah, mine doesn't have the color.
yeah, it doesn't need the color. You don't need all the RGB. It can just be the histogram.
Right. Oh, actually, if you keep pressing down, it changes.
It keeps
Sorry,
changing.
Rory, how did you do that?
You press the playback button, and then when you
Okay.
have a photo open, press down on your the 4 selection wheel thing.
Mine's old. Okay, I'll do mine. I'll keep searching. You guys keep going. Sorry.
So
I'll link something in the.
What camera do you have?
thank you, Rory. So what is a histogram and why do we need to know it and why am I bringing it up? So a histogram is a graph of all the tones in the images and in your image. And so this is something that I actually do look at when I'm taking pictures. And one of the reasons why I look at it is because I am I do love backlighting so much. But when you're backlighting, you have to be careful that you don't blow out those highlights. So I look at the histogram when I'm photographing, taking pictures, but I also look at the histogram when I'm editing. So there's all this amazing information. So when we were talking about looking at images that are black and white, in super high contrast, a black and white super high contrast image looks a lot different than when somebody had said, all gray image, or like, somebody didn't have windows. So it was much grayer when they were looking at their paper versus somebody who had a bright window and had a super high contrast. Your histogram is going to look different. So in the middle at 0 over here, this is when you're going to have the dark, your blacks of your images. When you're over here at 100, that's going to be your midtones and your grays, that 18% gray, which is what we used to use a lot with film. And then over here at 255, this is your whites. So if your histogram, and you kind of want it to look somewhere, well, depending on what your image, but you want it to kind of be somewhere in here. So if your image was super overexposed, your histogram would be somewhere over here in that bright area. If your image was underexposed and you're not letting a light in, it's going to be over here where it's black. So I just have some examples over here where I was looking, so it can give us tons and tons of information. And depending on what image we're photographing or what light we're photographing in, depends on what our histogram will look like. So an even exposure throughout the whole photo, that's going to be just like a mound. So I like to think of it like ebbs and flows or mountains and valleys. And it's just this like really, molehill, no super high blacks. It's just even. Now, if you have a photo that has high contrast, you're going to have more of like little molehills. Like, you've got your dark blacks, some grays, but then you got those super bright whites too, which in this one is in the background. If you have an image that has a low contrast,
Sorry, can I just ask a question real quick? So,
of course,
the histogram, is it supposed to be more of like a setting you can change, or just the info it gives you?
Info it gives you.
Okay, I get it. Okay.
So depending on what that info is, you can change your settings on your camera to change that histogram.
Okay.
So the photo with low contrast, meaning that, it's super gray, isn't going to have anything in the blacks or the whites. It's just going to be here in that low, just in those midtones. Now, a predominantly black image or a low key image where, you're just lighting up that one side of that face, you're going to have that mound over here in that black area, and high key image is going to be over here. So why am I telling you this? And for me, it's really for this, like, if your image is underexposed, you're going to lose the information in the shadows. So here, these shadowed areas, no matter what I can do in post, I'm not bringing back that information. I haven't captured it. It's just not there. It doesn't exist. So if it is underexposed this much, then I'm not going to, it's just a garbage image. This is what this image looks like. So it's this poor pup is just flying through the air, but it's a properly exposed image, even though it's a bit on the brighter side, because he's a light gray and it's a very light blue background. So it's going to be a little bit more over on the lighter side, because there isn't any true blacks in it. And this one is overexposed. So this is this is what I'm always trying to avoid. Not these ones, but this one. So because I like my images really bright and airy and I do backlight, I have to be careful that I don't overexpose or blow out my highlights. So we call these hot. They're like hot. There's no information there. It's just blown out. And there's nothing I can do after taking that picture to bring back that information. And I'll be honest with you, because I like my images a bit brighter and airier, I'm constantly checking the histogram, especially on like bright days, because what happens with your cameras is when you download them, you get this purple this purple outline if it's super bright, or you get this purple outline around your images, and it's there. Like you can't get rid of it. It's blown out. There's no information there. And of course, that's the best image on the whole one that you've taken, is they got the purple highlight, the purple outline of death. That's what I always call it. And there's nothing I can do about it. I can't bring it back. I can't do anything. So I'm constantly checking to make sure, for me, that I don't overexpose my images, and that I don't blow out those highlights. Are there any questions on that? So we will go over that again when we do editing as well. But it just has a ton of information. So like depending again.
Michelle, I've got a question. So your process would be, you would take the photo, then you would look at your histogram to see how the photo turned out. And if you weren't happy, if it was overexposed, you would do some adjustment, take another photo, check the histogram. That's how you work?
I do it pretty quickly though, right, Larry? So like, I do it
Oh,
quick.
yeah, you-
But like one of those things that I'm doing, like when I'm shooting, like, you know, when I'm meeting people or meeting clients is, I'm looking at the background, looking at the light, set my ISO, think about what I want my pictures to look at, set them in the scenario, posing them, I snap a shot. I'm going to look really quickly. I'm also checking to make sure that diopter hasn't moved. I check the histogram really quickly. And if that histogram looks like something like this, I'm like, good to go, going to keep shooting. If it's slightly over here more, I will move it down. I'll stop down at a stop or increase that shutter a bit so that I can make sure that I don't blow up my highlights. And the reason why for me is because I do, depending on where that light is, when I backlight, it'll just blow everything out. So I just, you know, I found that it's only through experience and doing it for a long, long time, but I do check that histogram. It has so much information. I also like realize that if an image, it doesn't have enough contrast and I want it to be contrastier, you know, there's things I can change or do or play around with to make like allow more light in or, does that make sense, Larry? But I'm
going through my photos now looking to see what I did.
Yeah, and is it moving? Is the histogram moving? Yeah, it's got.
I can see I can see the overexposed ones, and I can see the midtones, the good ones. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? It's got all this information.
So essentially, this is something that helps compensate for the fact that the display on the camera is really small, and when you just look at the image, you can't necessarily see if it's good or not.
Absolutely, Kay. Yeah. Because I mean, we're only looking, and this is the other thing I find when people are like, can I see the back of the camera to what the image looks like? And I'm like, the screen is like 2x3, like it's small, right? You're not going to get an accurate like reading until I download the images and really look at them. But I can't tell for the purple ring of death when I'm looking at the back of my camera. You know, I can only tell it by looking at the histogram. The purple ring of death doesn't show up on the back of the camera. Again, learn through experience because I've shot shoots where the purple ring of death is on all the pictures and I can't, you know, like sometimes when you're shooting events and stuff, you can't recreate that. Yes?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. You said the histogram should move. What do you mean by that? It should be moving. What does that mean?
So so flip back and forth from a couple of your pictures. So go to like one picture that's super bright and then go to a picture that's super dark.
Yeah.
Does the histogram change?
Oh, yeah. I just, because it looks like from these pictures, there's little dials that you can move, but I guess you just mean like the graph should be.
Yeah. Right. So in post-production, which is like the next class, if anybody decides to go on into photography, it is the photo 2. It's the editing portion. And so we will like touch very, very lightly on it at the last class. But when you're editing, you can, like when I'm in Lightroom, I can move these sliders back and forth and change instead of going into exposure and on shadows and highlights and do a bunch of other things, I can just move the graph, which is just a really simple, easy way to do it.
Okay.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is composition. So on top of light this week, I'm throwing tons and tons of stuff at you because composition is so exciting. And we'll go over composition and light pretty much the rest of the class. But elements of composition include, which I love, patterns, textures, symmetry, asymmetry, depth of field, lines, curves, frames, contrast, color, viewpoint depth, negative space, filled space, foreground, background, visual tension, and shapes. And that's just a few. But when you start to really think about and look at imagery, whether that's ones that you're making or ones that you see, you know, think about how the person is composing these images. So here are some compositional tips. So these are things that I often look for when I'm trying to make or perfect picture. So leading lines. Leading lines are lines that lead your eye into the picture. There can be natural lines that lead your eye into the picture, but when you think of like 1 point perspective, so 1 point perspective, and I'll get you, a lot of you will start shooting in 1 point perspective, which is fun. Like you stand in the middle of the street and you just shoot looking down, right? and all the lines are leading to that one point. Diagonal lines. So diagonal lines are used to create great movement. So that's like, moving through lines this way, like going through sideways. Framing. Last week when we looked at Solitarier's work, he is a master framer. He shot through windows and doors. So you can either use natural frames such as windows and doors. People use trees sometimes when they photograph, they frame things like, but you can use other things too. Like last year, which you'll see pictures of, like me and my kids, we took toilet paper rolls, paper towels, slinkies, cones, like the orange cones, frames, like we were like actual frames. We were finding all kinds of things to photograph through. Figure to ground. So finding contrast between what you're photographing and the background. Like, is there a contrast? Filling the frame. So just making whatever you're photographing the whole frame. Patterns and repetition and symmetry. So leading lines. So these are some examples of leading lines, and they don't just have to be like a doorway. So, in this one, we can see the leading lines, all these beautiful lines leading right to this person in the silhouette of the doorway. But they can also be like very much more organic, like the petals of this flower all leading down to here. Here's some another examples of some beautiful leading lines. Again, like, and these are diagonal, like, all leading all to her. And this is one point perspective. So again, all these beautiful leading lines leading to this one doorway and this one perspective. Here's some more examples of one point perspective and all those beautiful leading lines. And I love this one because when I first saw it, I didn't realize that there was just this person sitting down there. So think about where they had to photograph this in order to get those beautiful leading lines, right? They're sitting at the bottom, or they're right on the bottom of that bench. Rule of thirds. This is another one I absolutely love. So you saw in the first two images for leading lines, that was also, rule of thirds. This is when you put a grid of like a tic-tac-toe grid over your images, and you're putting the object you're photographing in one of those intersecting lines. So one of these intersecting areas in that tic-tac-toe grid. It just gives like negative space. It gives your eye a chance to move around. And I quite love it. Again, it doesn't always have to be with people. It can be like organic or other things. Like I love the silhouette of this flower on the cityscape.
It's beautiful.
Here's another, example of some rule of thirds, here in these areas and these negative spaces. I love using rule of thirds in portraits, but often people don't like it as much as I do, like leaving that negative space on the side. People really like things to be centered. Framing. So this is trying to photograph through things. So this is when this is us last year when we were photographing through slinkies, but also, photographing through, this was that little boy I photographed in California. He was, I just love these little elements in his full diaper as he was walking by. Tin cans, broken screens of fences. And this, and here's the thing about composition. Your pictures can have more than just one element of design. It can be perspective. It can be, framing. It can be rule of thirds. It can be multiple things. It's just about having at least one of them in there. I love framing so this, was on a subway. This isn't my picture, but I love the idea of framing. And I do this a lot in my portrait work where I frame children within their parents. So like their faces aren't often around them, but like it's just them in between their legs or framing them differently. So I love the fact that, he's definitely holding on to something and, just about this little kid. Really, truly figuring out like a picture of a frame or shooting through fingers. And that brings us to our artist tonight. So does anybody know who Uta Barth is? No? So Uta Barth is a German American. She was born in Germany and then moved to the United States in her teens. And why I like her. So I'm just going to give you, I don't think I have a quote for her at first. So this is her, and she really looks at light. So I crumpled up my notes. So let me just break them out again, show you a piece of paper. So one of the quotes she says is, I keep trying to find ways to shift the viewer's attention away from the object they are looking at and towards their own perception of the process. How can I make you aware of your activity of looking? So she really plays around with, so first she photographs themes such, her theme of her work is about perception. She's really into this light. She also photographs, majority of her work and much of her bodies of work have been photographed in and around her studio in California. So not long like all these other places, but a very like solitary or 2-block radius. Most of hers are done in her studio. She really is interested in the themes of perception and the optical illusion that they can play. So really playing around with how the camera sees differently than our eyes are in that perception. So the photographic perception versus the human perception, which I'm really like, which fascinates me because I've said it to you guys a bunch of times already, but the camera does see differently than our eyes do. So again, really just paying attention to the way light changes throughout the day and then just documenting it. And again, these are all just done in her studio at different times. So, and they're quite often working. She works a lot in diptychs and triptychs. She's created massive billboards. She's shown internationally. And often really, they make me like, why am I looking at? I'm always wondering like, what am I looking at? Why am I looking at this? This particular work I quite like. So again, when we're starting to photograph, just changing the way we angle our camera. So in this particular image, she's just shooting down at her feet. And at that same moment, she just changed her perception and just shot up. She's not shooting with the same settings, because if you shoot down, it's much different. The ISO, aperture, and shutter speed would be different. I mean, she's just shooting down and up. And how is that different, right? Really challenging us on how we see and that perception of seeing. Again, doing it again here, she did this whole series about photographing these places where she's looking down and then just up. For me, the camera is just a sketchbook, an instrument of intuition and spontaneity. That's not from her, but I quite like her work. I've been following her for lots and lots of years. And what I love about her is she does challenge me to think about what I'm looking at and really challenge me to look. Like, I think I didn't really see light until I saw her work, until I really saw it. And that after I started really looking at her work and looking and reading about her, I started seeing light, like really seeing light. And now I'm just obsessed with it. It's all I do is look at light and make everybody around me look at light. So who's got questions? I have nothing more for you tonight. Yes, Federica, yes.
I think it's kind of on this topic. So I love sunsets. And I love the colors right now, the way, especially I live right beside Hyde Park and I spend a lot of time there. And, right before, like, at 7:30ish, it's like gorgeous. I can capture the sky and the light perfect. When the sky goes down a bit, those nice reds, I can't capture it. And I don't know if it's because I need to just stop focusing on the leaves and then focus more on the sky. Like, I'm having a hard time with that lighting time.
The twilight, like, yeah, right after the sun sets. So it's like the sky's like electrified. So what are you what are you trying to photograph?
Just the colors against the contrast. Like, you can see all the dark trees and I just want to capture, my pen keeps falling.
No, that's okay. Do you want to try to capture like that bright blue with the trees? So almost the trees would be a silhouette? Yeah. So then you want to expose for the sky, not the trees. Okay. So I would point your camera and expose for the sky. You might have to, so when you are photographing it, what are you finding like your images look like?
Just bland. Like, it's just not very, like, I can't get a lot of color depth. And I know, like, the Nikon shoots colder, but, like, you know, I open up the aperture. I try to, like, I play with shutter, like, you know, just trying to let more light in, and then I try to reduce light to get contrast. And it's just kind of like a flat, like, it's just not capturing it.
It's not what you expect. So, so a lot of the image, so I'll be honest with you. So a lot of the images that you see that's all that contrast and bump and vibrancy and stuff is done in post-production.
Okay.
So,
Lightroom? Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't losing, because I'm like, I feel like I've tried every like combo. But
did you
that's what I
increase
thought,
your
especially with the lights, but
did you increase your ISO too, to like the sensitivity of it?
I'll try that again. I think I did, but I'll try that.
Do you know?
Yeah. Okay.
The one thing I would try, so I find like, so right now it's probably like right around this time, right? Like right at the sky, it's like the sun had just set, and it's, you have to almost photograph like Hyde Park. I haven't been at Hyde Park this time of night in a long time, but you almost need like more light. So I'm wondering if you went, I'm only using this as an example, but if you were like on Ronci and it was super, like there was lots of light noise at this time of night, those images would look a lot different than if you were photographing the trees. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah. And I think if like I think a lot of that's done in post-production too.
Okay, cool.
To
yeah. I just wanted to set my expectations to like whether I was missing something or if it's just something post. Okay.
No, I'll be really honest with you. Like with the exception of, it's not very often that I don't, like even when I take pictures on my phone, I edit every single picture. You know, nothing that I take is ever, for me, it's like I do tweaks to everything. Either like on, you know, an app on my phone or if I'm shooting with this, it's definitely in Lightroom. Some pictures, like especially if I'm using direct light at sunlight or sunset, you know, it's vibrant, it's contrasty, it's punchy, but not all the time. You know what I mean? Sometimes it really depends on the light. And I'm hoping, like now that because you're going to start paying attention to light, you're going to really start paying attention to it because it changes. And even like the next 2 days, but who knows what the weather's going to be like. But the next 2 days, they said it's going to be cloudy in Toronto. And so, you know, great opportunity to photograph like something with very even light. But, you know, there could be, and then it's going to rain on the weekend. So like, I wonder if you photographed at twilight on a wet day at night. And some of Walter's work, he'll speak to that too, because he does these beautiful landscapes where he's really playing around with light at night. But yeah, that's a great question. Great question. I hope that helps.
Michelle.
No, that definitely does. And I have found that on like cloudier nights, it's much easier. Like last night, there wasn't very many clouds. So I was like trying to capture it and I had a lot harder of a time.
Yes.
And I didn't know if it was anyways, but when it's cloudier, I can capture a lot more of those reds. So that completely answers my question. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Larry.
Yes, I posted this on Facebook and as a channel. But so last week I was playing around with the ISO aperture, and shutter speed and that, and it was one of those days where there was like fluffy white clouds and that, and so the sun would be behind the cloud, and I would be spending time trying to get it. And then just when I get it and I'm start taking pictures, then the sun comes out from the cloud, and and then I get everything. You know, I realize, you know, it's. You know, as I get faster, you know, it's I'll never reach your level, but you know, it was kind of frustrating in a way, but challenging at the same time. It's like, sun, stay there while I change this. And but then another fluffy white cloud would come along.
That's Larry, that happens to me all the time. Not right now as much because I'm not shooting as much, but like when I'm shooting like every day, especially outside, and I'm like, I get it all set up, I'm interacting, I know what I want to get. And then that sun comes out from behind the cloud. And honestly, I'll just wait. I'm like, I'm not going back. And because I know the picture I really want is that beautiful diffused light with it's not hard and contrasty when I'm shooting portraitures. Now it's different when I'm shooting something that's a bit more artistic and looking like, or if I'm going to change it to black and white or something like that. But that happens to me too. It does.
Yeah, Larry, that happens to me all the time too. I'm like, I'm trying to take a picture of a bird and the bird's flying away and then it comes back and then I'm trying to change it and then I don't know. It was hard.
It is. It's well, and it's a process, right? Like, a lot of the reasons why I'm very specific on, I hope like, I'm very specific on why I choose to show you the artist that I do. So, Robert Frank, I showed you because I wanted you to see process. I wanted you to see that people take a ton of, like, even though when we're looking at imagery and we're bombarded by imagery, it is a process. Like, he shot 28,000 images to narrow it down to 86. He spent 3 years on that project. I mean, it's, so I think sometimes we think, I've got this camera, I'm in this class, I should automatically just be taking all these amazing pictures. I'm going to be in contact next year, but it's a process, and I think sometimes we forget that it is a process. And then last week I wanted to show you Saul Leterrier's work because it's so, like, he's this master framer, but, he's shooting landscape in a very unique and different way than a lot of other landscape or street photographers do. Which I find is really interesting. And he also is photographing in just a 2-block radius, which I find this amazing. And I love Uta Barth's work because she's really looking at light, and it's a study of light. And she's talking about this perception of the viewer and how we see light versus how our camera. And really, her work she's explored this for 30 plus years. So anyways, that's...
Michelle.
Yes, Raph.
So what's the exposure compensation? Yeah, I don't know what to use that for.
For on your camera?
Yes.
To look at, like, when you're doing it?
It's,
like,
yeah, I don't know what is it for. Like, it's because it says 0 + 1 + 2 + 3, and then it goes to 1, 2, 3. So what is that exactly?
So like on your exposure meter, Raph?
Oh, yeah, I don't know if that is, how does it, it's
so remember
right,
last year that is on your camera, I think. Is that your aperture?
No. The aperture is, it's on the other side. No, the aperture is this one, right? Is this?
That's your aperture, yes.
Yeah.
It's on the lens, sorry.
Yeah.
And so the exposure, so when you're just moving it, you're moving it up one and you're moving it down one. On your camera, it's a little different than everyone else's. I see, yeah. And then on the other dial, it's your shutter speed, right?
That's the ISO.
That's your ISO. The other one is your aperture. Your shutter speed.
That's the shutter speed. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know what this is for.
So I believe it's just moving it. Up one. So like if you're looking, does yours have the exposure meter inside your camera? Like when you're looking through it and you push that shutter release, I have to take one off. If you're pushing the shutter release button down halfway, does the exposure meter come up?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So when you push your camera and when you use that dial, and if it's +1 or -1, it means it's exposing it one, like a stop ahead or a stop back. Like you're exposing it, giving it more light or taking light away.
It doesn't do anything. Like I don't see a difference.
No. Yeah, I have to look it up, Raf. Let me look it up on your camera. You have to give me a minute though.
Okay.
I'm going to end class unless anybody has any other questions. And then if you need help with your cameras, you can totally stay behind, and Raf, stay behind and we'll look that up on your camera. Does anybody have any other questions?
Michelle, just very quickly, in terms of feedback, are we to, like, is the feedback what we're discussing in class, or is there individual feedback? Because I'm just not sure if I'm missing something.
So great question. So for the first few weeks on our exercises, I don't give a lot of feedback because they are exercises. There is like one bigger project, and I think it's the 4th week. And it's worth 30% of your grade, and we're building a series of images, and I do give a lot of feedback for that one because I'm really looking about how you created what is your series about. But to be honest with you, I'm looking to see that you did it, that you so for the white balance, and I mean this with such grace, Larry, you post so much in the Facebook group, which is amazing, but because he posts a lot in there, I'm able to give him, like I commented like on framing of his pictures, remember, like our different things, like, but if it's just the white balance exercise, I'm looking at it and being like, yeah, you did it. Or if it's like this one, the object on the run, where we're looking at the 6 pictures, I'm looking to see that you did it and that you understand like what the shutter speed, you can show motion and you can stop motion. This one, I'm going to look to see how many different ways you can light this paper and make it look interesting. The next one, we're going to do long exposures and light painting. And then week 5, we're going to do like our project, and that I'm really looking at, like, can you build a series? But if you want like more individual feedback, you can send me images and I'm more than happy to give it to you, but I'll grade you, like I'll give a grade at the very end, but it's not, a lot of the exercises, it's like, you did it. You didn't do it.
No, and that's fine. I needed that clarification, and that was very helpful. So thank you for that.
But Natalia, if you need or want me to look at other things, please send it to me and say, Michelle, look at this, and I'm more than happy to do that. But for this stuff, I'm really looking like it's really more for you. It's more for you to really start to understand your cameras. And I've developed it. Like I've really thought hard about how you can move from one point to another, and how these exercises can help support that. But yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
What's the homework for the 3rd week? What is the homework?
So it's going to be that paper so we're going to start looking at light. So for this week, you can use artificial light. So, I kind of told you that my go-to light is this IKEA book lamp that's attached to my son's desk right now. I move it around and play around with it. You can use window light. So when you're looking at your windows, can you light it from behind? Can you light it from the side? Can you do direct lighting? If you're going to use an artificial source, people used bike lights. They used, somebody used twinkle lights. Somebody used, just lamps or different things to kind of shape that light around it. So you can be as creative as you want with this. But I really want you to do is just to start to see light. So pay attention about how the intensity. So if you move the light closer to the object you're photographing, it's going to be more intense and you're going to get a sharper shadow. That shadow is just as important as, where that intensity of the light. If you move your light source further away from what you're photographing, those shadows are going to be less intense.
And you said 4 to 6 pictures.
Yeah, 4 to 6.
It has to be paper?
I'd like it to be paper. Yeah. Yeah, for this one, paper. And you can be it can be crumpled paper. You can, it could be ripped. Some people did it doesn't have to be white paper. It can be any kind of paper. Somebody did some really interesting things with origami paper or wrapping paper. It can be whatever you want, but it should be paper. And it'll be it'll be in the follow-up email too. Yeah? Federica?
I have one last question. Sorry.
No.
Artificial versus natural light. So, do you have any preferences? Like, obviously not for this task, but just in general. Like, I know it's good to always try and shoot with natural light, but are there things to be careful with artificial light other than it just being too strong and kind of fading someone out? If it's a portrait photo, or is natural light more lighter on skin?
Yeah, so I use artificial light all the time. So even when I'm in studio, so I have a photo shoot tomorrow, branding shoot. It's like a 3-hour shoot, and we'll shoot half of it with natural light, and we'll shoot half of it with strobes, which is a flash of light. The reason why I like the strobe or the continuous flash of light is it's if tomorrow isn't a bright sunny day and I'm using that direct light, it's going to be kind of dull. It's not going to be as vibrant. It's going to be much more even. But this particular person wants, when we talked about her branding, she wants that punchy shot, that one shot. So I'm going to shoot her with that flash of light too, which it tends to be a brighter, contrastier, because it's just a flash. I have a massive, which you saw like diffuser on behind my son Christopher, like that's the umbrella I have on there. So it does, I can, if I move it back far enough and if I don't have it as intense, it can be super soft. But if I bring it in closer to who I'm photographing and, you know, punch it up, then it can be super intense too. Like, so it's just kind of what you want your images to look like. I use both. I think it's, but you don't have to use both. Like, it's just, that's what I use. I find there are photographers who are just natural light photographers and they do amazing, amazing work. I just learned on strobes too. And now they have like LED panels and they have all kinds of different lighting. I've invested a lot of money in my strobes, so it's not something that I want to just throw out the door and get now LED panels. But I think if I was to go and buy again, I would get continuous lighting, which is like some sort of panels, because you can see the light all the time. Like a strobe is just a flash. It's just a flash. Does that help, Federica? But when I'm using continuous light versus artificial, let's say when I'm using window light versus artificial light, that's when I start to change that white balance. That's one of the reasons. So, you know, you might see some color shifting. And also like when I'm using strobes or artificial light, I make sure the lights in my studio are turned off. So there's no, like they're pot lights, but like, so there's no other color casting going on. So, you know, it's just that light going off. And then the whatever ambient lights in there. Does that make sense?
Okay, cool. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions?
One very quick question about the assignment.
Mm-hmm.
We are focusing on single source lighting for this, not going to be using multiple sources.
Well, Kate, you know, since you're just my guru over there, I
own a lot of lighting fixtures.
I know. You can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want.
I might give you a few more than 6 pictures then.
Perfect. I'm excited. I'm actually really excited. I'd love to learn lighting from you, but to be honest, like that would be amazing. I'm sure you could teach all of us some great things.
If anyone has questions, ask away. I'm between theater projects right now because we can't have audiences, so I have nothing but time.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so you can do whatever you want. You can use multiple lighting sources. You can use gels. People use gels sometimes, which is like these plastic things you can put over the light. So like that pink heart, we had a gel over the light and then that made the light pink. And then we photographed through that in the first image. You can do all kinds of things with lights, right, Kay? You can light's amazing. Like when you start to see light, especially artificial light, like when you really, and I know just a small amount, like you can really do some amazing things. And then, and natural light as well. Like when you really start to look at just like daylight, like the sun and how the sun changes throughout the day or behind clouds. It's just amazing, right? It's just amazing. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, sorry, just to backtrack just a little.
No.
I wasn't able to find a few things on my camera, like the toggle and the focus lock.
Sure.
And the aspect ratios also as well.
That's okay. So I'm going to end class.
Excuse the barking dog.
That's okay. I'm going to end class. And then anybody who needs help finding things on their camera, please stay behind. And if not, I'll see you guys all next week. And I can't wait to see what you photograph. And see you next Wednesday.